cardiovascular health, the hours that you have previously to see test, lay on the television, do some regular time, 2 hours of supper, 4 blood draws so you can run food, stuff like things that can cause severe reactions. So, diverse group of capabilities here. Yes, sir. We try to be a full line operator here. So in the morning, it's a little bit slow right now. In the morning, it certainly is. We log in, we manufacture something up to set up their home. They have to set up strategies and how to apply it. New workstations and new machines we do have here as well. You see this cage here, we're a non-expensive pharmaceutical company to sell vaccines to pharmaceutical companies.
At all. You just need more arms to push them, right?
Right. So we don't do any of the COVID vaccinations right now. That's all. We do a whole lot of flu and measles, mumps, and rubella, that kind of thing. As it's commercialized, and the COVID vaccine comes in, obviously we have that capability to do that as well. And then this area here is our cardiology trailer has brakes and stuff, and draft down whenever it goes in there, seizures, that kind of thing. And so instead of managing 20 line items in a hospital, but we also, like Kevin said, change this into the molecular kit build. So on this one, you see some of these robotics here, like you can detect the media, the liquid that the swab is transported in. We work with several companies to make it all in the USA. We get to all the directions. Two places you don't get anything from the beginning of the pandemic. Just China and Italy. So now we're fully made in the USA. We did a study with rangers on one of the videos and turned out inactively on the virus. Any computer who's had a whole lot of it's like this area is great. Where we were doing R&D in the midst of production. Now we've been able to bring in each of the pieces of equipment that we use over there so that we can validate different assays on it, so we're not stuck with one set of reagents. We can validate different collection methods for new testing, like Kevin said, we're looking at.
This is a good investment, I think.
Yeah, it's a very healthy investment.
Stand on this side? Does that work for y'all? Yeah. Well, whatever you need.
Any questions?
Okay. So we take the mask off?
Yeah.
Thank y'all for coming out.
Good, how are you?
Thank you so much, Angela. Oh, you are? Okay, great.
It's awesome to see y'all.
You haven't been here in a while.
You want lapel or pie? Lapel or pie? Lapel.
Check.
Now I got it.
How's business? Everything good?
Business is good.
Can't complain. Go. All right.
Get into, sir?
Yep. You go stand outside, get struck by lightning here.
According to our people, that's later today, so.
Yeah, so I think take off. Well, come on.
I'm already recording. Okay. So.
You want to come on and say a few words, or one of y'all, somebody from the company? Okay.
I was going to say, can we have somebody from the lab, can you tell us who you are, first, last name and all that, and then kind of what this tour was about?
Yeah.
I know y'all didn't mic him up, but
Sure.
do you guys want me to hold handheld mics?
No,
or-
it's fine, it's fine.
Okay.
My name
I'll
is
just stand.
Michael Conroy. I'm the Vice President of Compliance for Premier Medical.
Might want to talk up just a little bit.
We asked the Senator to come in today so we could give him a lab tour, explain what Premier's been doing throughout the pandemic and prior to, and our goals after the pandemic.
And so what did he see? What departments or sections was he able to tour? And
We gave the Senator a full tour of our laboratory, went through our molecular testing department where our COVID testing occurs. We looked at our next generation sequencing equipment and the equipment in our toxicology, allergy, and core laboratories.
and why was this important for the senator to be here?
It's important to show that a South Carolina company is making the efforts and putting the investment into the community, both here locally, statewide, and nationally.
Anybody have anything else? And you, sir, are?
I'm Kevin Murdoch, the CEO of Premier, and we're very thankful for Lindsey to be here today.
You think you want to help, you want to ask him to help you do in the near future? What does it look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I know invested in the variant testing, and so we're probably labs in America volume do the testing next generation that we have today.
Okay.
Senator?
Well, thank y'all. This is a heck of a story, and I'm proud of this story. It's in our backyard. Most people don't know about it. But there was a time when it would take a week to get a test result back. We had a reagent shortage. Testing was in great demand because you wanted to know, do I have it? Can I go back to work? Can I stay around my family? So this was the first certified lab in South Carolina, I think, right?
Yes, sir.
Outside of the DHAC system. And they were able to provide a force multiplier times thousands. They were able at one time to do up to 300,000 tests a day. I don't know if they ever did that many, but they broke the backlog with DHAC. This is where the private sector came in to help the public sector provide capability and capacity that wasn't available. And what have we learned? We have got to have a private sector component to deal with pandemics. The government footprint and infrastructure is not enough to deal with a pandemic. So what we were able to prove here in South Carolina is that the private sector pretty quickly could ramp up and do things the government couldn't do. They make reagents now. What they're trying to do is to make sure that the medical supply chain, that we don't have to depend on China and overseas entities any longer for the basic equipment, and the supply chain will be made here. We don't have to get our reagents from China, that we're going to make this stuff here. So it's a heck of a story. They provided tremendous capability to the public sector, and it came from the private sector. They invested millions of dollars, and they've allowed us to get on with our lives, because the more testing, the more you understand the nature of the illness. Now, why is this relevant to the future? Viruses try to survive. They will replicate. They will try to penetrate the vaccine. This is sort of a war you're in between science and the virus. And the virus is very clever. We already see variants offshoots of COVID, the COVID virus that we're dealing with here, and they're going to test the variants. Some people who have been vaccinated still come up positive because the variant has been able to break through. The more we know about those variants, the better able we are to adjust the vaccines. And this could be like the flu, where every year we have to get a COVID-19 vaccine because it will replicate itself. The good news is that the vaccine seems to be working in terms of diminishing the hospitalization, the severity of the virus. But we do see variants being able to break through the vaccines. So far, so good in terms of diminishing hospitalizations. But this lab right here in South Carolina is testing variants for the entire country. They're one of the first people to invest heavily in variant testing to make sure if there's a second comeback of the virus, we'll get ahead of it. So I'm very proud of that. So right now, the big story, I think, with COVID, Kevin, do you have that?
Yep.
Is where did it come from?
Yeah.
So where did it come from, and does it matter where it came from? It matters a lot. If, in fact, COVID-19 came from the Wuhan lab, where there was a mismanagement by the laboratory, that's a completely different scenario if it came from bats that infected humans at a wet market. The Chinese government needs to help the world understand this. And what early on had been seen as a conspiracy theory that this was a leak from the lab is now being seen as a more mainstream possibility. The one thing I've learned about this lab, they spent a lot of time and money in making sure everything is clean and done right, and they control the whole system to avoid a breach. So there is a Wall Street Journal editorial by two specialists in this area saying that based on an analysis of the COVID-19 virus, the most likely scenario is it came from a lab, not from nature. That is important. So I'm going to ask Dr. Fauci about the work product of these two gentlemen. And do you do analysis that do the following purpose? China, they came from source that would make happen is that they treatment. Well, it seems, I don't know for sure, that got the source of the virus market in a particular lab. That's true. It shows that it's a complete then in China, and to get to the bottom of it, and we're seeing right now as the virus itself and comes up in form, testing primarily Carolina. First company in the country that I know that's invested heavily in being variant. I don't want to scare people. The likelihood of this replicating it, concentrating the vaccine. You need to do that so you can vaccines in to make sure we massive. So that.
A couple, the WHO went to investigate. What will you do? Because when they went, it was almost like a tour, is what I'm hearing
Exactly,
reports.
yeah.
So what can you do in order to make China comply to allow our researchers to see
Right.
the origin or
Right.
get their hands on the original evidence?
Well, there's two things I want to do. I want to deal with the Chinese refusal to cooperate. The WHO was shown what China wanted them to see. They didn't have the ability to go in there and interview people and investigate whether or not it came from the lab. It was a dog and pony show. That's unacceptable. But first, I want to know, how did our government potentially get it so wrong? There was a group of scientists early on who wrote a letter saying that the idea of a lab leak was conspiratorial, right-wing talking points. How did they know? Is there a deep state science department? Is the NIH and the State Department, were there people in those two organizations trying to tamp down the idea that it may have come from the lab because they support the lab? It seems to me, from emails we've received, that there were people in the State Department raising the alarm that this came not from a bat in China, but from a lab in China, and they were silenced. It seems to me that people in NIH had curiosity, and their curiosity was stopped. I want to find out who are the people involved in stopping asking the questions about could it come from a lab? Because those people did this country a great disservice. Early on, when this possibility was raised, it was shot down. It was shot down heavily. Anybody suggested it came out of the lab was a right-wing nut. Now, that's not science, that's politics. Is there politics in science? It appears there may be. Is there a component in the scientific community that's trying to hide the relationship between the United States and the lab? Maybe. I don't know. But I do know this. The voices that raised concern about the lab leak were silenced. And we're going to have hearings, I hope, in the Senate to find out why those voices were silenced. Why did the scientific community come out so hard against a lab leak when they really didn't know? What was the motivation behind that? I think it's important for the American people to understand that and make sure that this never happens again here at home. Secondly, we've got to put pressure on China to make sure it's not a dog and pony show. It's a real investigation.
Your reaction to the emails from Fauci that have been released?
Well, I know Dr. Fauci. I want to find out what happened. In the email chain, people are raising the possibility of a lab leak. Not so much Dr. Fauci, but other scientists that were tied to the research, NIH, the relationship between NIH and the Wuhan lab, came out hard, saying that anybody who suggested this was a leak from a lab was pushing conspiracy theories, not good science. It now appears that they didn't have science to say that. So I think it's incumbent upon Dr. Fauci, who's in charge of all these grants, to come before the Congress and answer these questions. How could these scientists so early on shoot down the lab leak theory without a thorough investigation? And why were people who suggested it may have come out of the lab, why were they silenced? What were they trying to hide? And do you agree with the analysis in this Wall Street Journal editorial that seems to suggest the overwhelming evidence that the nature of this virus came from a lab, not from nature? Those are the things I want to know from Dr. Fauci. It's not about firing him for me. It's about finding out what happened and how it happened. And do we have a deep state science department that's protecting its turf? I think a couple things happened early on. There are people that did not want Trump to be right. Trump suggested this may have come from the lab, and he was called a xenophobic racist by suggesting it came from the lab in China. Well, some people just don't want Trump to ever be right, and those same people are stakeholders in the grant program, where their livelihood is on the line. So the people doing the investigation need to be outside of this system. We truly need independent people here in our country asking these questions and digging for the answers. I think it starts with Dr. Fauci coming before Congress and answering the questions I've just proposed.
You mentioned that there's been a shift in perception of this theory from being dismissed in the mainstream
Yes.
being seen as more credible. What do you think it is that's driven that shift over time?
I think during the election, there was a real effort to blame everything on Trump and to marginalize his theory of the case. It seems to be the Russian dossier is similar to me. You had all this information that the document collected by Christopher Steele was not reliable, but people used it anyway. They wanted an outcome. I think there's a storyline developing here that people wanted an outcome. They wanted to shoot down the idea it could be a lab leak because Trump would have been right. Maybe they were protecting their own self-interest here. So that's what I want to look at. Follow the money is a general rule in this kind of stuff. And I hate to say, but I think part of the motivations were political, not scientific. And we saw that in the FBI, where the system failed. The system ran every stop sign presented because they seemed to want an outcome. Did this happen here on the science side? Was the science not validated? Did they jump to a conclusion because they wanted a political outcome, not a scientific outcome? If it's true, they used politics, not science, then that really is unnerving to all of us.
Senator Graham,
Yeah.
doing another hearing at this point, like, what's the point of doing another hearing? Seems like we're doing hearings just to have hearings.
We really-
Nothing ever gets resolved
Yeah.
or
Good question.
finalized.
Well, I think we had hearings about the Carter Page warrant. A lot got resolved. The FISA court rebuked the FBI and Department of Justice for fraudulently obtaining a warrant. One guy went to jail. I think truth here is very important, and we haven't had an investigation. I would argue that there's been no investigation inside of China, as she indicated. It was a tour. I would argue nobody's looked hard here, that they set up a system in the State Department and was shot down. So here's my belief. After 500,000+ people dying, we still haven't really looked long and hard how this happened. And until we do that, we can't prevent it in the future. And if the system has a political bias, I want to know about it. This shouldn't be political. If it is political, that is very unnerving. One last thing, I know we got to go. The Vice President is in Guatemala today, I think, and going to Mexico about our immigration problems. With all due respect to Vice President Harris, you're missing the big pull factor here. You could put $40 billion into the Triangle Nations and not stop the flow until you change our laws. The reason so many people are coming, 178,000 I think in April alone, is that the catch and release program has been restarted by the Biden administration. If you get one foot into the United States, you claim asylum, you never leave the country. They release you into the country, you have a hearing 4 or 5 years away, and nobody ever shows up. The word is out in Central America and other places that they've restarted the catch and release program. Until you stop that, like Trump did, the flow will never stop. I'm all for helping Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras with their problems. There are real problems. Corruption and violence is a real problem. That is a problem. But I think the money alone won't fix that problem. People are going to keep coming by the hundreds of thousands until we change our laws. The day you understand that if you come to America seeking asylum, you won't be released in America, you'll be sent back or sent to Mexico, they'll stop. 90% of it will stop. All right, thank y'all.
Thank you.
Okay, thank y'all. Thank you very much. Thank y'all.
I was all nervous and shaky.
Yeah, come on, you did good.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, this is one area we really hadn't had. It's amazing after all those years, all these dead people, nobody's really looked into this.
So where are you off to now?
I'm off to Washington. Trying to set up a process to find out what happened.
Okay, we're all fine. At least you're not flying to China, right?
not anytime soon. The day you hear I'm doing that, call me up and say, you sure you want to do that?
Senator Graham, I want to ask
Thank
you a quick
you.
question.
Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that our intelligence community was doing research or investigating that the virus came from the lab in China.
I don't know that. I talked to Marco about that, but I knew that there were voices in the State Department, NIH raising these concerns, and it got shot down.